Hi friends, and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to take some time to sit down and just chat for a little bit. I've been super introspective lately, and when I say lately, I mean in the past year or even in the past handful of years. I feel like the transition between being a college student to being a full-time working adult is probably the biggest change for a lot of people in their lifetime. I know it is for me so far. I mean, if you think about it, we spend the vast majority of our childhood and teenage years as students. And then all of a sudden, we're kind of thrown into this brand new territory and faced with these brand new challenges. But with those challenges come a lot of realizations and a lot of lessons learned, which is why I thought it would be super interesting to sit down and dive into the different lessons that I've learned in my late teens and early 20s. Quick disclaimer, I still am in my early 20s. I turned 23 very recently. But again, like I mentioned, I feel like the past couple of years has been the most life-changing for me as an individual, and I'm still consistently learning and growing every single day. So with that said, let's dive into lesson number 1. Friends come and go. And I know right off the bat that might sound super callous, and I'm not saying that friends are disposable by any means, but there is this understanding as you grow, and especially out of college, where you realize some friends don't stick around for the long run, and that's totally fine. I have this habit of romanticizing relationships, and what I mean is I oftentimes find myself meeting a new person, instantly clicking right off the bat, and I just start going like, oh my god, they're gonna be my new best friend, we're gonna do everything together, they're gonna be my ride or die for the rest of my life. And lately I've been telling myself to stop doing that and realizing, don't force friendships into something that they're not. Don't get me wrong, every single relationship requires effort. Let a relationship be what it is and not what you think it should be. So even if you're best friends with somebody for years and years and years, if you guys naturally drift apart, that's okay. It doesn't mean that you necessarily suck as a friend. It doesn't necessarily mean that they suck as a friend. People change, and sometimes that means you go down different paths. You outgrow some friends, and some of your friends might outgrow you, and that's only natural. That's just a part of life. With that said, lesson number 2 is you don't need a ton of friends. I know when I was younger, I had this habit of collecting people, if that makes sense. Again, I would meet somebody, I would really like them, I would really want them to like me. Even if I didn't particularly like a person, I still needed them to like me back. I wanted everyone to like me, I wanted everyone to be my friend, even if deep down, I didn't even want to be their friend. I think I had this sense of quantity over quality, if that makes sense. I know a lot of kids when they're younger, they struggle with this idea of popularity, being the popular girl in school, having a ton of friends, being well known. Now as I get older, I think that's overrated. I have my close, tight circle of friends, and that's all I need. Okay, lesson number 3, setting boundaries is key. And this is a very loaded and heavy lesson because it can really be applied to so many different aspects in life. I could sit here and talk about boundaries for hours and hours, but I think for me, how it impacted me the most was with friendship and with relationships. I've been talking to my therapist for a while and talking about my issues and my deep-rooted challenges that I face every single day. And one day she was like, the root of a lot of your issues is your inability to set boundaries. And at first I was kind of like, I don't really know what you mean. I feel like that's not super applicable to me. And then she gave me a book. I will link it somewhere. I don't actually remember the name of it, but I started reading this book and it was truly eye-opening. I feel like setting boundaries, once you're told that that's an issue that you have, it's like, oh my god, that makes so much sense. How did I not see it? But until you're kind of awakened to this idea of setting boundaries, you don't really realize it's an issue. So how boundaries apply to me and friendships specifically, like I mentioned, I tend to romanticize friendships and relationships. I tend to set really high expectations on people because I look at the potential of a relationship as opposed to what it actually is in the moment. And I realize that that's very unfair of me. This is just like a very, very, random example. For instance, if a friend of mine doesn't come to my birthday party or something, I would immediately be like, oh, why wouldn't they come to my birthday party? Do they not care about me enough? I would go to their birthday party. That's something I always caught myself doing. I would always say, why don't they do X? I would do X for them. And to some extent, that can be super unfair. I always prided myself on bending over backwards for people, like being the super helpful, super selfless person. But then I would unfairly put that expectation on other people when they didn't even ask for it. You have to be able to set boundaries and you have to be able to say no sometimes. So for instance, if I get invited to an event and I just don't really want to go, I'm just not feeling it, I have to be able to stand up for myself and say, hey, I'm not gonna make it. I'm not saying you should be a flake. I'm not saying you should never show up ever, but every once in a while, it's okay to say no to people. It doesn't mean they're gonna start crying and you failed them as a friend. At least they shouldn't take it personally, because if you're able to set boundaries for yourself, it also prevents you from putting unfair expectations on other people. And you allow a relationship to be what it is, and you put in as much effort as you want to get back. The next lesson learned is partying is not what it's all cracked up to be. So this is pretty self-explanatory. I feel like it goes very much hand in hand with this idea of needing to feel popular when you're in high school and in college. It's also that need to, go out to parties, be social, be wild, have that college experience. Definitely when I was in college, I felt like I needed to say yes to every single frat party I was invited to, go out to all of the clubs. But as I'm getting older, I'm realizing that it's just not for me. I mean, I like it once in a while. I like socializing with my friends. I like dancing. But personally, the club environment and feeling sick to my stomach from alcohol usually just is not worth it for me anymore. Some people, it's their bread and butter, and by all means, go for it. If you graduated college and you're still hitting up the clubs every weekend, I have some friends who do that, go for it. But for me personally, I definitely desired it in my head more than I actually wanted it in real life. In college, I definitely put this pressure onto myself to party as much as I could because everybody told me, this is the college experience. You're only allowed to live like this for this many years. You better, experience all of it and experience that like frat dorm life. I never even dormed, but I think that added to the pressure of like needing to attend every single event. But yeah, looking back, I definitely could have skipped out on some of those parties. The next lesson learned is confidence is quiet while insecurities are loud. So I think it's like this misconception that the most confident people are always the loudest in the room. They're always brightly colored dressed or just, the most out there, which can be true, to some extent. But I think more often than not, people who are very, very insecure, they tend to do one of two things. They either tend to, try to disappear in the background as a wallflower, which a lot of the times actually is more apparent than somebody who's just present in a room, or they tend to overcompensate. I definitely did this. I would go to class wearing like high heels and stuff and like always like super dressed up, like full glam. I went to the grocery store with a full face of glam and I would strut around the hallways like I own this shit. But deep down, I was so terribly insecure in college. And again, it was me overcompensating. I thought to myself, if I wear the certain clothes, if I look a certain way, if I walk a certain way, it would make me feel more confident. But all it did really was like slap a bandage onto something that needed to be fixed deep down. And I'm not saying people who like dress up are all super insecure. I'm just saying like sometimes that's the case. So if you find yourself doing these sort of coping mechanisms mechanisms, just be mindful and like think to yourself like, why am I going to the grocery store in a full face of makeup? Is it because I just, love makeup, I love to experiment, very artistic, whatever? Or is it because I'm actually trying to hide something about myself? Again, I'm literally known on the internet for fashion. Like, I love fashion. So there's nothing wrong with going to the grocery store in full glam and wearing heels, whatever. But when I did it, when I was in high school and college, it wasn't about wanting to express myself. It was about trying to hide myself underneath like this facade. Like, I needed to wear a lot of makeup. I needed to be dressed to the nines. I quite literally would not leave the house without like false lashes, and I wouldn't be caught dead in sweatpants anywhere. I think true confidence is being confident in yourself without all the fluff. So strip away the makeup, strip away all the pretty clothes, whatever makes you feel confident in the moment. If you can still strut your stuff, that's true confidence. On a similar note, be conscious of where you seek validation from. So I think for me in particular, I kind of realized this as I started getting more traction on social media. I think, being confident in yourself is an age-old challenge for a lot of young people. But with the rise of social media, it definitely makes it, in my opinion, so much harder for people to truly be confident in yourself. So for me, I would definitely seek validation from strangers on the internet. When I posted a picture, how many likes did it get? How many comments did it get? And when I first started getting big on social media, I said to myself like, wow, I'm getting so much more confident, like I'm less insecure. When in reality, I was just being fed fake confidence from random people on the internet that I somehow put all of my weight and all of my personal self-esteem in their hands. Again, it's like strip away all the likes, strip away all of the comments, strip away all of this external validation from other people, and what was I left with? Personally, I came to the realization that I wasn't left with much. I depended on other people to make me feel good about myself, to make me feel confident in myself, to make me feel pretty, to make me feel intelligent. So I guess it's just like, be mindful of, where you're seeking validation, even in your own partner. I think that's really important. Jason, my fiance, he makes me strive to be the best version of myself every single day. He definitely challenges me, and he definitely challenges my insecurities, which I love. He's a big proponent of tough love, and it might not be the best dynamic for everybody and for everyone's relationships, but it really works for me in the way that when I'm feeling insecure, he specifically does not compliment me. And I know some of you are immediately being like, oh my God, like what an asshole, he should like uplift his fiance, whatever. But he's trying to look out for me in the long run, right? So if there's a day where I'm like super bloated, I'm just like feeling kind of crusty, kind of ugly, and I'll like vent to him, I'll complain to him, being like, oh, like I'm so fat, I'm so ugly, whatever. He purposefully does not rush to my rescue and start lauding me with all of these compliments, like, oh, you're so beautiful, honey, don't worry about it. Instead, he just stays quiet and he lets me work on it myself. Because if every time I was like super insecure, he tried to put a band-aid on it by just complimenting me a ton until I felt okay, that doesn't make me feel good about myself inside. I'm just seeking validation from him. That's not to say he doesn't compliment me. Like, he compliments me when I'm not purposefully seeking it from him. I think that has definitely helped me find my self-esteem from within myself as opposed to from him or from people on the internet. So yeah, it's very obvious of me to sit here and say, don't seek validation from people on the internet or from, strangers, but it's less obvious to say, be mindful of not seeking validation from your friends, from your family, from even your significant other. Only person that you should seek validation from is yourself. And again, that's how you're going to find your true confidence. Okay, so the next lesson is reacting defensively often indicates a core issue. So I feel like a lot of these lessons that we've been talking about kind of go hand in hand with each other, or they're kind of like within the same vein. So in this one, it's about defense mechanisms again. So if somebody were to criticize me, now I am very conscious of how I immediately react. So if someone were to say to me like, oh, Vanessa, your feet look ugly or something, I would be like, okay, like, because I'm not particularly insecure about my feet. But if someone were to say like, oh, Vanessa, if they said something about like, oh, your ass looks flat, that's something that I've been insecure about for a while. And so immediately I would just be like, oh, like, oh my God, how dare they say that? Like, it's so untrue. Like, I've been working hard on my ass. Like, I've been doing those squats and those hip thrusts. Like, who am I trying to prove to? Am I trying to prove a point to them, or am I trying to prove a point to myself because I am insecure about that? So that's kind of a silly example, but it definitely applies to a lot of situations. So sometimes I even have friends where if I even like a nice criticism or like something that I think is helpful, if they're immediately like, oh, they get angry at me, they get defensive, they get like, oh, I'm not like that. Like, how dare you call me like that? Deep down, I would bet $100 million that deep down they're insecure about that. And deep down they know that that's an issue that they have to work on. Because again, if I was criticized over something that I feel 100% secure in, I'm not gonna care. It's not gonna faze me. But I'm not saying that you should just brush aside all criticisms. I mean, if you're getting approached by multiple people that you love and whose opinions you deeply care about, and they're all criticizing you on the same thing, then yeah, you gotta take a step back and think to yourself like, oh, is their criticism valid even if I wasn't initially insecure about it? I guess just like a general rule of thumb is when you're approached with criticism from anyone, stop, think to yourself if it's valid, and watch how you initially react, because that might indicate a problem. So the next lesson learned is everything is a balance. And again, this is a very loaded and heavy lesson. It can quite literally be applied to every single thing in this world. But for me in particular, it particularly applies in regards to work-life balance. So growing up in a stereotypical Asian household, I was led to believe that having a strong work ethic was the most important thing in the whole world. Just work, 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 grind, grind, grind every single day. And that will bring you happiness. But as I'm getting older and as I'm, becoming a full-time working adult, I'm realizing that there's so much more to life than just working hard. I mean, what's the point of working so hard day in and day out if you're unable to reap the benefits, right? So straight out of college, I started earning a lot of money and I started doing really, really well for myself, especially at this age. And I was so happy, I was so proud, but every day I was just working constantly, working like 12-hour days. And I realized like I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy with that lack of having that work-life balance. And I would just tell myself, oh, if I work really, really hard now, later down the line, I can take it easy. And I do think it is valid advice to an extent to say, oh, you should make short-term sacrifices for long-term happiness. That is true, but somebody like me who's extremely type A and is a perfectionist, is a workaholic, there's never going to be a time where I feel like I work hard enough and I can just like relax. Like one time Jason was saying to me, he was like, what would you do if you had unlimited money? And I told him like, I would just do nothing. I wouldn't have a job. I would just relax. And he called bullshit on that. He's like, there's no way that you could just sit down and do nothing. Like, I'm not wired to be like that. In fact, now in my early 20s, I'm realizing I have to de-wire myself, unwire myself. I don't know, to shift my priorities, because as I was gaining traction on social media, I told myself, when I have this many followers, when I make this much money, that's when I'll relax. That's when I'll take a break and go easy on myself. But then I hit those goals and then I set new goals and I say, okay, now when I make this much money, when I have this many followers, that's when I'll relax. And it's a never-ending process. So me sitting here and saying like, oh, I'm just gonna work hard now so I can play hard later, total lie. I definitely would be unable to. So I think for me, the best course of action is, instead of like doing a bunch of work and then a bunch of play, I have to just incorporate, having a life while I work, if that makes sense. The next lesson that I learned is in every relationship, it's you two versus the problem as opposed to you versus the other person. I hope that made sense. Basically, it applies to all relationships, so like friendships, relationships with family, but I would say it particularly applies to romantic relationships. So for instance, if you and your significant other get into a fight, I think a lot of times people have the mindset, it's like, oh, it's me versus them. Like they're wrong and I'm right. They lose, I win. When in reality, it's the both of you against one problem together. Like you truly are a team. As cliche as that sounds, you and your partner are a team, and any problem that you guys have with each other is really a problem that you two have to face together. And if you have that shift in mindset, it makes it so much easier to let go of any of the anger and let go of the resentment and the bitterness, and instead you guys can put your heads together and tackle the problem as a team. Okay, so the last lesson that I have for you today is holding in anger is never the solution. So this is something that I see females tend to do more often than males, and I think it's because women tend to be people pleasers, and they tend to not want to cause any conflict. I used to be really bad at bringing up any issues that I had that might cause conflict or, you know, cause drama. So if somebody does something that pisses me off or annoys me or rubs me the wrong way, if it's something that's minor, I tend to just like hold it in and like not say anything, because I tell myself, oh, it's not that big of a deal, like I'll get over it, it's not worth the conflict that it might create. But what happens is, instead of, you know, communicating about something and, you know, working through an issue, I just hold it in, and then I start to build this like track record of like what they've done, and I just start to like build resentment about it, and they don't even know that they did anything wrong because I chose to not bring it up and I chose to not talk about it. And so what ends up happening is it's like a volcano. It just builds and builds and builds until all of a sudden I just unleash and I'm a demon, and then the poor sucker on the other end, they're like, what the hell did I do? Like, why did something super small trigger Vanessa? When really it wasn't just one trigger, it was like a bunch of little things that just built up. But it's my fault for not bringing it up in the first place and dealing with the situation accordingly. And I'm not saying that you should be confrontational on purpose. Like if you're having a bad day and your friend bumps into you, you shouldn't be like, this is an issue that we need to discuss. I'm saying you should recognize if it's a continued pattern that you see in someone that consistently rubs you the wrong way, then it's like, yeah, you guys need to talk about it sooner rather than later. So not only have I been the perpetrator in this habit of holding things in, letting it build and then exploding, but I've also been the victim of it. So in college, I had this friend group, and I would say we were pretty close. Like I didn't spill all of my secrets to them or anything to that extent, but you know, we hung out a lot. I really enjoyed their company. I thought everything was great until one day, completely out of the blue, they decided to just cut me off like that. And I was completely shocked. And you know, I went to them and I said, hey, let's work through it. Clearly there've been a lot of underlying issues that we haven't been talking about. To my surprise, like, let's work through them. And they were just like, no, we're done with you. So that was incredibly hurtful. And so it turns out that throughout our friendship, they were upset by certain things that I did that I had no clue were upsetting them. And instead of talking to me like an adult and working through them, they just let the anger and the irritation build up until they decided they were done with me. And I think it was so hurtful because A, it was so avoidable, and B, throughout the entirety of the relationship, you know, I knew we weren't perfect. I knew we weren't 100% compatible, but you know, I liked them and I loved them as friends. And it's just like to know that the entire time part of their interactions with me were fake because of all the anger and, you know, bitterness that they held on to. That was really hurtful for me. But hey, at the end of the day, they did me a favor because they exposed to me the kind of people that they were, and I'm better off without them. Friends come and friends go. I feel like this is all wrapping up very succinctly. So we have made it full circle, so I think now is a good time to stop this video. But let me know if you guys thought that this was helpful, if this was insightful, or even just enjoyable. I really enjoy talking about these and, you know, letting you guys know me on a deeper level. This is just a handful of lessons that I've learned over the past couple of years. I have so many more. I have like 5 off the top of my head right now. So let me know if you guys want to see a part 2 of this video. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys.